my name is Clay Williams, and this is People Talks, presented by Canal Pursuit Productions. The idea behind People Talks is that everyone has a story, and everyone's story has value. Value to those who hear it, and value to those who own it. Our topics center around fitness and mental health, and we have a mixture of people with shared experience and people who work in the health and fitness fields. One speaker each week, except for this week. This week we have James Gardiner of Firstar Therapy and Matthew Arnone of Mindframe. James is a certified athletic therapist, strength and conditioning specialist, and yoga instructor who holds a master's degree in Kinesiology and Health Science. He has held positions such as head athletic trainer in the Toronto Blue Jays organization and Rehab Coordinator at York University. He has also worked in various therapy, conditioning, and sports injury rehab roles, including working within the York University Athletic Therapy Program and as a performance consultant for the University of the Bahamas. Matthew is a professional soccer athlete in the Canadian Premier League who holds a bachelor's degree in kinesiology and health science, as well as an applied specialization in mindfulness meditation. His career has taken him to both international and domestic locations, such as the USA, Italy, and most recently, Canada. Matthew's passion for optimal performance in his professional career drove him to continue learning, which ultimately led to his discovery of mindfulness. With a focus on growth and a healthier approach to sport and life, Matthew discovered he could achieve peak performance. Welcome to People Talks. I'm so glad that you're able to join me today.
I appreciate the opportunity, Clay. It's an honor, and we're both privileged. And thanks for everybody for listening. And this is this is something that we've talked about in the past, and we'd love to continue to talk about into the future, and supporting you and you supporting us, and all of us kind of growing together. And we've met through these mediums before, but you haven't met Matt. So Matt, I'll let you say hi, and then we can jump in, Clay, wherever you want to go.
All right.
Yep, Clay, it's a pleasure to be here, and for all the listeners, thank you guys for listening. Very humbled to be asked to speak, or to be asked to have a chat on this and talk. And I think it's a wonderful title, People Talking, right? And People Talk is the series, and that's just, for me, that's what we all are underneath all of the labels that you mentioned. James and I are people, and we're here to help human potential. We're here to help others realize that. So we are so grateful for the platform. Thanks, Clay.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's start with a really simple question. Can you tell me a little bit about yourselves and what you do?
Matt, you go first. You got the better story. Sure. I guess in somebody's eyes, I guess it's a better story. Obviously, my name is Matthew. I am a professional athlete. I most recently have played in Canada in the Canadian Premier League, which is 2 years old to date. Prior to that, I was in Italy. Prior to that, I was actually in the United States playing for a team down in North Carolina. And prior to that, I was back home, man. And this is kind of where we kind of backtrack. We go in reverse order, where James and I had this overlap of being a professional athlete, working with, James as the head athletic therapist, rehab coordinator, all those things, finding him in the clinic and dialoguing with him very often, helping me with some nagging injuries, and finding alignment, I think, in the thinking was most important. And I think that's where we connected most, is in the alignment of thinking, and the philosophies really of not just performance, not just sport and sort of the thing we bonded on, but very much this human element and being responsive rather than reactive to the things in our lives, whether that be stressors on or off the field. I personally in my life experienced at a very young age domestic violence. I was exposed to that at a very young age. My father struggled with mental health and addiction. So my brother and I, not being very socialized, developed a very strong bond and a very strong relationship through sport. And being the younger of the two, always wanting to be like my older brother, it was very natural for me to follow in whatever he did and grow that passion alongside with him. And I think it was something truly special as we did grow. But ultimately what happened was the byproduct as I grew older and the stakes became higher and I advanced to the levels of a youth professional with Toronto FC Academy. I found myself in a sort of a singular identity. I was no more Matthew. I was just the player. I was just the athlete. And when we strip all that away, as we'll talk about in consequent questions, I'm sure, Clay, is where do we strip that down and really allow the human to be a human? And for me, that sort of the byproduct of a singular identity was anxiety, was depression, when the failures happened, and having nowhere to turn but to sport. And sport was not the soother in this case. It was something that I dove and dug my hole a little bit deeper. And when tragedy struck in my life, I began to see the parallels to sport and how they are entangled, and we cannot look at one in a vacuum or the other. I lost my brother in 2010 to a car accident at 20 years old. I was 16 at the time, and my world kind of spiraled out of control, both in sport and in life. I then obviously was released shortly after from Toronto FC Academy, where I saw the tangible pathway to my dreams of being a professional taken away from me, which is where I went to York University. We'll kind of give you the Cole's notes of that. 5 years later, 2 national championships, and a great friendship established with James. But I guess the shadow or the darkness of that 5 years, when one would say, wow, 2 national championships, that's wonderful, is that I can honestly say, when I reflect on it, is that I did not enjoy one moment of those 5 years, because I was dealing with performance anxiety on the field. I was just dealing with anxiety off of the field, and really no awareness of it happening. So that is one of the larger regrets in my life. And I knew that a change needed to be made. I knew that if I wanted to progress to the professional ranks, where I found myself kind of in a lag period after graduating from York, I needed to train my mind. And that's kind of, as the bio mentions, stumbled upon mindfulness as a way to train the mind. It was just kind of the logical linear path to, I train my body, I train on the field. I'm in peak condition of both, but what about this thing called the mind? And once I kind of found that, I found peace within myself, I found growth within myself, and it became a linear path to my dream, which was professional sports. And I'm so grateful that I spent as much time as I did in professional sports, and just the ability to sort of reach that precipice, reach that peak. And it was only through going within. Once I went within, the growth was exponential. So I'm here through Mindframe. I created a program for athletes, but ultimately it became something where I crossed paths with James, and we made a program for humans, and we're so excited about it. So I'll stop blabbing. That's the long of it. That's me up to present date. I'm so excited to be here, and I'll kick it over to James.
Yeah, no, I think, let me just jump right on that. I every time I hear Matt's story, I'm, driven a little further and get to know him a little bit more. And our time overlap definitely. While I was working at York University and he was an athlete at York University, both had identities, associated with that time, him as an athlete, myself as an athletic therapist. And I mean, that's where I make my profession, is call me an athletic therapist, call me a strength and conditioning specialist. But I think similar to Matt, it took me a lot of time reflecting and looking back, and it took me finding yoga and yoga finding me as a lifestyle, as a philosophy, as a value set, to really glue a lot of these floating pieces in my professional career and maybe even my personal life together and make them seemingly fit. And we moved internationally for a couple of years and just got back in, almost a year ago now, 10 months ago in June. And Matt and I had some dialogue while we were getting ready to come back, and we sat down for, he's Italian, so it's always a cappuccino or something nice like that. I'll just have a coffee, but he'll have a cappuccino. So I'm shifting as we go towards cappuccino as well. But lots of good talks, and we ended up aligning, as Matt said. And so he's the athlete by identification. I'm the practitioner by identification, but together we're two humans that feel the value of intrinsic motivation and intrinsic or introspective analysis to grow our output and to do something like Clay, like you're doing with the canal pursuit, and do something beyond ourselves to sort of help sport and share this. And there's no secret here. I mean, we want to get to it. We'll build it up a little bit. Our platform is called Performance Wellness. It's Firstar Therapy, which is sort of my brand, my business, and Matt is Mindframe. And we've put these two things together to deliver I'm going to call it a game-changing, unmatched program that we're now rolling out in discussions with athletic organizations, universities, colleges, and now even venturing a little bit into the corporate space. Why? Because the athlete is the identity, but we strip that down. It's performance wellness of the human, and it's a human first approach. And we've been asked a number of times, sort of, how do you venture down into like the mental health side? And well, we don't, we're not mental health practitioners. And I think that's important to understand. Neither one of us owns the title of mental health practitioner, but we both hold the title of being empathetic, of being able and willing to listen, and being able and willing, when we're ready on our time, to be vulnerable enough to share our story. And I think you touched on it early with sort of what you're doing here with People Talks, and it's a great title. Absolutely. And no matter where the expertise is always valuable. And I think, your story, Matt's story, you're the boss of that story. And when you share it, there are pieces of it that are going to resonate. There are pieces of it that are going to have different feels. Well, I mean, when we're talking mental health, like we all experience mental health, but we don't necessarily all experience mental illness. We don't necessarily have diagnoses, but there's this sort of balancing scale that tips, mental health tips one way and tips the other. And I'll just tell one quick story from this morning, because we're both guilty of over talking. But this morning I was riding my bike into the facility and it started pouring rain. And I was like, I don't have any change of clothes. I don't have any change of clothes at the facility. I can either like get really upset about this, or I can just embrace this and sort of shift towards this is what being alive is feeling the rain and being able to ride this bike. And then I started thinking about it, and it actually took up, I think, my entire ride. But by the end of it, I thought, like there's also this other thing called the sunburn, which I don't like. So does it have to take the perfect scenario for me to be happy? Like it can't be raining and it can't be burning me. So it has to be like, right, this perfect, and I thought about that, and I delivered that when I got to the athletes that we work with. And it was eye-opening even in that moment to sort of be able to reflect and ask me 6-7 years ago to have that sort of reflection. And I would have said, yeah, is that helping anybody get better? Is that helping a shoulder get better quicker? So it is this constant evolution and this constant growth and learning. And I came across mindfulness and meditation a little bit differently, through a yoga ashram and studying in Bahamas. Yeah, it is truly, when we understand that the mind and body are they are not two separate entities, and they're not distinct from one another. In fact, they're quite entangled, and that's where our sort of platform comes from. So those are the long-winded answers in terms of who we are, and I guess how we've gotten to where we're at. But again, really happy to be here and share this story and share what we're doing through your platform, because this is fantastic.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is really timely and ripe for right now. When you consider that over the past 5 years or so, there's been a lot more discussion in all platforms, media, social media, all over the place, even across kitchen tables, about mental health. There's certainly still a stigma. Especially when I think about first responders or military, the guys that have to be the type A personality can't admit what might be considered weakness. So there's still a stigma, and we have a long ways to go. But I think the stigma is not as bad as it was. A lot more people are talking about it, and realizing the value of a little bit of work on ourselves and our own mental health. It's not something we have to deal with ourselves. It's something that we can deal with a little bit of help, right?
100%. And I've been lucky enough to sort of host a podcast as well. And just as you said that, you're talking about military, but we can take that into any realm of sport as well. And I had an ex-professional, retired professional catcher on, played 16 years in the big leagues and was always sort of thought of as, you're the tough guy. You're not allowed to complain. You kind of just have to go out there and wear the brunt of it. And his one reflection on his career that ended up being the title of the podcast actually was like, he regretted not stopping to smell the roses along the way. And I think that is hugely powerful for a 16-year veteran, a guy who comes off as, maybe a little rough or a little gruff around the edges, or rough around the edges, and sort of in a demeanor of being that strong, nothing's going to bother me type. But guys won a World Series. He's done all the things. Matt's won 2 national championships at the U Sports level. And to sort of reflect again and look back at that career and say, like, I wish I had been in those moments, maybe a little bit deeper, is one way to analyze that, right? And I think spot on.
It sounds like one of the questions I was going to ask is, what are your thoughts on the connection between physical and mental health? I'll kind of reframe that. I think from what I gather, what you're doing together is based on the connection between physical and mental health. Can you go into a little more detail of what you're doing, what you're launching?
Sure. Matt, you can take the lead on that one.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, this performance wellness program, I think, to put it in very simplistic terms, I think it's about space. I think it's about creating space and creating awareness. So once we create space, we create awareness within. So we are able to observe ourselves, and whether that be in the realm of mental health or the realm of physical health, we're creating space to identify within. So we're creating a little bit more objectivity, whether that be the rotation of the shoulder, the full range of motion. Once we take that space, once we create that space, and we've now established that there is more space than the conventional use of the shoulder or the wrist or the hip, we've now created more space. We've now created a greater repertoire of movement to pull from. Likewise in the mind, I think when we are in distress and we do look to our support systems, there is a moment of advice that comes, right? There's a solution. There's this sort of compassion that we feel from one another. And that's kind of the reason, I think, in a subconscious level, why we go to other people for that advice, because we don't believe it when we tell ourselves. So what this space does in the mind, when we calm the mind and we create space between reactivity, which is making a decision or acting with emotion, and emotionally regulating, therefore to respond in a better manner, what we do is we actually create space from myself, and we'll call it the mirror or the pond. When the pond is calm, we are better able to see our true self. With that objectivity, we're able to make a better decision. So we learn more about ourselves, and we have that growth. We understand our responsiveness to a stressor, whether that stressor, evokes a higher response, or is some post-traumatic stress disorder available from, looking at a picture of my deceased brother, or whether it be thinking and talking about these moments in my national championship final as a touchy subject, or as I'm able to, whatever the response is to the stimulus, I'm able to better see it and offer that compassion to myself as if I was another. So I think that's where the space becomes super, super important. And when we talk about, I touched on it just very briefly, is the emotional regulation to the stress response. When we are able to observe our own stress response, there is a function in the brain, in the right anterior insula, that actually is responsible for not just positive affect, but emotional regulation. So we can actually down-regulate the nervous system a lot quicker by simply identifying what emotions are present. Well, when we think about what that stress response does to the we'll call it the psyche or the mental side of this body that we have, we notice that the stress response in the mental side is very much this anxiousness or whatever feeling we're feeling. When we're able to identify that, what we also are able to identify is what is happening in the body when I have that thought. A very mental thing is eliciting a physical expression. So when I'm able to identify the physical expression, I can use that as a stimulus to understand when I'm in need of emotional regulation. Pair that with actual resilience tools, and not just saying, hey, mental health, hey, I know I'm like this, but actually providing a solution to the problem that is within, that is innate to you, and you understanding yourself better, you know what works for you, right? James is a practitioner. I'll use James as the parallel. James can come and fix my ankle and understand the acute injury, but if he can't, he is not the expert of me. He is an expert in his own right, in his own field. He is the expert of James. But if Matthew can understand himself better, Matthew is better able to emotionally regulate. Matthew is better able to actually garner and lower that down-regulate, that parasympathetic nervous system, activate it, down-regulate the stress response, and therefore we can decrease muscle tension, which is a physical response, as a result of a mental stimulus. And when we compare those two and we can identify those things within, then we're better able to get a proper output, or we're better able to optimize performance, or away from sport in general. It's just an optimal experience, right? We talked about, you know, enjoying the moments that we're in. James talked about having a wider range of focus where the criteria for happiness isn't so narrow that we are basically living majority of our life in distress. And I think when we understand those things and we understand what makes us tick, we're better able to have a better output, which is quality of life away from sport, or also just, you know, optimal performance on the field. So I think why it's titled Performance and Wellness is for that reason.
And what it is in terms of like how it plays out is we've mapped it into sort of a, I mean, the general template is a 4-phase program where we start sort of with the training wheels on, learning what the bike is, learning, understand, like these are the handlebars, these are the brakes, these are the stop signs, these are the other things. And then gently sort of like letting go of the seat, letting you go on your own, taking the training wheels off, holding on underneath the seat or on the handlebars to help you, and then letting go, and then away you go, and you take it and ride. You're going to fall, absolutely, but you're going to get back up, and you already have the tools and things in place to help you get back on the bike and ride again. You'll learn how to go down hills, you'll learn how to go up hills, you'll learn that as you go along, but you take this program and walk away with it, and it's yours. It's not because Matt and James told you this is what you're supposed to do. We'll give you the framework, we'll give you the map, and then you take whatever route you want to take with it that works for you. So it's a 4-phase program we've laid out over 8 weeks with two sessions a week, sort of, and we'll work in team spaces. We can do this. We are doing this virtually or in person when that's allowed, and we very much feel that this is, is it ripe? Is the time ripe? Yeah, I think so. I think the COVID and the identity piece is massive right now, right? Like, you take away sport from the person who identifies as an athlete, you've taken away their livelihood, you've taken away a part of them. And I think where we've really shifted in this performance wellness platform is this is internal locus of control. And this is a shift away from dependence and a shift to independence and self-advocacy. And Clay, in my time as a practitioner, which is nearing 15 years, I've been guilty of being that dependent source. You know, you need me to get better. You need me to stretch your shoulder. You need me to prepare you to go out on the mound to go pitch 5 innings or be on the pitch or be on the ice. I played into that. But again, as we age, as we learn, as we grow, there's been a ton of reflection and a lot of this discussion with athletes and like, where can we be better? And I think as a healthcare system, just as the same in the mental health space, with reflection, there's growth, and it's painful at times and it's slow, but at the same time, like, we need to keep reflecting. And so the idea very much as a practitioner and working with athletes is, I'm the best practitioner when you don't need to come back and see me. You'll come back and see me for updates and when your shoulder starts bugging you or your ankle starts bugging you, or you're going to tell your sister about it or whatever. But we want to set athletes up so that they get to if they're on their way, you know, to that precipice or that, you know, to the edge or to the ledge, they have options before they get there. You know, we've seen it, we've experienced it in any number of fields. You know, as a practitioner in the clinic, we hear about it. As a practitioner on the sidelines, we hear about it. As an athlete on the field, you hear what your teammates are going through. You can see signs in other people when you're paying attention. You know, what does that handshake look like? What does that handshake feel like? Why does that one athlete always smell like booze when they come in every day? Whatever the signs are along the way, we make these mental notes, and we can help contribute to, and again, neither one of us is a mental health practitioner, so we bring other people in that we can refer to if these are cases where we need somebody in that space. 100% will refer. But the idea with performance wellness is that it's for everybody, and there are no barriers to entry. So when we get into the physical space, we're talking all of the things that we would talk about in a clinic: neural drive, proprioceptive activity, neuromuscular facilitation, creating a language between brain and body point A or joint B or whatever the case might be. And that is a form of understanding. That is a form of intentful action that will drive mindfulness in a way that, if you're not quite to that space where you can sit, close your eyes and you know, hover, you can get there through physical means by understanding your hip, by understanding your ankle, your knee, your shoulder. And so when we roll the program out, we're doing elements of both. Like, we can call them mental and we can call them physical. We just call it one. And you know, we're doing visualization of an orange on a counter, but we're also doing, like, let's truly visualize what's going on in that hip when you're moving, and where are you stuck, and why have you never explored this range, and do you actually need that range? So it's resilience in terms of the physical body and mind combined, certainly. And from as a practitioner, again, it's non-reactive. It's meant to be foundational. It's meant to be progressive, as opposed to, again, that reactive term. We don't want to wait for the injury to happen. Let's start talking to the body so you can advocate before it happens. So that's kind of the general, I guess, look at what it is. And again, we're open to having these discussions with, bodies of people, with athletes, with organizations, with corporations. We just want to get this in people's hands because we embody this, we live this, and anybody who has worked with us or through us has been nothing but positive feedback. Nice.
Cool, very cool. One of the things that one of the elements you're talking about, I've seen. So I've talked to quite a few people as a mental health advocate. A lot of people have told me their stories. Quite a few of those have told their story in a more formal setting, people talks or their local organization or their local support group. And what I've heard from a lot of them is the first time they shared their story, it was really difficult because it was something that was only theirs. It was never, a lot of the things they talked about hadn't had a name before. The second time they told their story, it was easier. The third time, the fourth time, it grew more and more easy because that story now could be examined from the outside or looked at from a different point of view, right? More objective, more ability to analyze it rather than sit and soak in it, right? So yeah, I think there's. It sounds like there's an element of that being aware and yeah, having a name and calling it something as opposed to as opposed to bearing with it, right?
100%. And a piece of this that I'll let Matt take because again, like we work together, and I love the way that he summarizes it. But the beautiful part about this program is that we want this to be a shared experience. This is the shared human experience, because again, as I share my story, you begin to, yes, be vulnerable. You'll also begin to receive the empathy of others. You'll also feel the resonance in others. And Matt, take that down that road. I just think that shared experience piece is so massive, and what that brings to the athletic population, to the human population. We're seeing it now. We're seeing it in any number of fields. And again, like maybe COVID is a thing that's highlighting a lot of things that have always been there. It's just that we're being forced to look inward a little bit more now. But the shared human and allowed, yeah. Right? Like let's 100%. We could flip the script on this and say like we're being forced to do that. But if we flip that and said like, let's start looking at lockdown or this kind of thing as an opportunity to pause, to slow down, the number of people that don't understand how to do that don't understand that, like, if I'm not doing something physically, or I'm not moving the dial forward in my career or my bank account or whatever, there's a lot of external sources of disappointment and happiness that ultimately will fade away at the end. But when we're doing it from within and starting to create this space to really reflect, it resonates outward. I mean, it just honestly, it has this effect into relationships and into your interaction with the environment even, and all kinds of things. But I just want to pull it back around, because that shared human experience, I think, as you talked about not feeling alone, Matt, I mean, you tell your story so brilliantly, and because it's yours, you own it. And no doubt it's not easy every time that you talk about it, but I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, no, it's the reason that I share my story is again, exactly what you touched on. I think it's about resonance, and I think it's more what happens is, and I'll take this a little scientific just for a moment, and then I'll bring it back to this sort of spirituality that we feel and how it pertains to mental health. But we talk about COVID and we talk about this pandemic as a chance to be still. Well, if we're going to scientifically define that is attentional focus, right? The ability to be calm in the present moment is the definition of mindfulness. That is very much a skill that must be trained, right? So, Clay, yourself, if you never played soccer before and I asked you to I asked you to play professional in the Canadian Premier League, it might be difficult. Likewise, if I was asked to run a marathon, it might be quite difficult for me because I'm not trained in that space. So why would we expect an individual who has never been still, and in Western, we'll call it Western philosophy or Western society, it's very much an ideology that if you are not moving in any direction, you are moving backwards, or it is not acceptable, or that is we'll call it linked with a low self-efficacy because you're not doing something, right? And we're all guilty of that at times, where we do indulge ourselves on the couch, or we do indulge ourselves being still, or not, as James said, adding dollars to our bank account, or not moving progressively, or physically just not moving. And I think this stillness is an attentional focus that must be trained. And through the art of mindful breathing, through the art of breath work, through the art of visualization, we bring the mind to do what the mind is meant to do. So, you know, Clay, we're here, we're talking about performance wellness. If my mind goes to what I had for dinner, that is the opposite of attentional focus, right? My mind is doing something other than what I wanted to do. So we lose that intention. So that skill must be sharpened. And I think we do that in a very beautiful way, where we expose a lot of techniques to find attentional focus in your way, whatever is best that resonates with you. What happens in that still pond, I'll go back to that reference where the pond is still, we see a better reflection of ourselves. So in my story, when I tell my story, as you mentioned, Clay, it gets easier and easier for those individuals to tell it. What's happening there on a scientific level is the attunement. We are attuning with ourselves. We are resonating with ourselves. That is what attunement is. Once I do that, I go within. I become attuned to my story, to the emotions that arise, to what it can do to others. And when you hear it, it resonates with you, that shared human experience. And when we think about it one more time, I'll finish on the scientific, but when we talk about pain and isolation are a shared neural pathway in the body, right? And so when we have this isolation, social distancing, quarantine, lockdown, all of these things, they are interpreted in the brain. Lack of socialization is interpreted in the brain in the same way as pain. When we experience a failure in life, we go inward. We internalize a lot of those feelings. There is 100% a societal construct as well that we're trying to break down, as you mentioned, stigma towards mental health, or being a type A, or we can call it toxic masculinity in the male space, whatever you want to call it. All of those things are shared pathways with pain. So what we can do, and when we look to the external, as James mentioned, we start to, you know, I'll make a parallel to sport as I best know, is my identity as an athlete is based on, I'm going to set a goal. I want to win that soccer game. Well, understanding that there are 11 players on my team, plus another 11, plus the referee, plus the fans, there are many variables that dictate that happiness. When I go inward for happiness, I find a much stabler source, much more stable source of that confidence, of that happiness, of that self-reflection. So when it all starts with a calm mind, I think is the take home here. And that shared experience, when it resonates with others, we find that, hey, Matthew experiences that thing. Well, Clay mentioned that. I experienced that. So James now, hearing Clay's story, hearing Matthew's story, has resonance. He has experienced resonance from his shared community. When he feels that, that is the opposite of isolation. That is opposite of that pain pathway. So what we're doing is we're breaking those things down. We're understanding and allowing the individual to come to a place where isolation is actually deterred, right? We talk about in the brain, we have inhibition as well as activation. So when the left part of the brain, the logical thinking part of the brain activates, it actually has the ability to inhibit the right part of the brain. Likewise in reverse. So when we activate that positive affect, we're actually switching off the negative affect. We're switching off the pain response. We're switching off the amygdala, which is our stress detector. So all of these things work in conjunction with each other and work in their own right, but in an inhibitory pattern. So I think this is a very important thing, right? But first thing is first, we must train these things like a skill. If we've never trained them, we cannot expect to be adept at them when we need them most.
And the movement piece on top of that as well, like the movement, that we can go into the science of the movement as well, and dopamine and cortisol levels and all kinds of different things, but we need to move. There's a couple things that humans need to do. First of all, we need to breathe to stay alive. We need to, feed and fuel, but we need to move. and we need to socialize. These are things that are ingrained in our DNA. And so that's where this is so simple. It hurts at times when Matt and I talk about this in terms of, is this a thing that people will resonate with people? Is this something that people will do? But when we dive a little deeper into those corners and go there, again, not everybody may resonate with right and left hemispheres of the brain, but I can guarantee every athlete is gonna resonate with, what does my right ankle do compared to my left ankle? And so those, and what does it do when I move? Oh, you've had an injury in that ankle. Okay. There's a lot of things that go into that. And a lot of that is historical fear. It's what you do and don't know. It's limiting range of motion, or it's range of motion that you've never tapped back into. And there's where re-injury is going to occur, because as Matt touched on earlier, when our repertoire or our reserve of movement, for example, or strength is only this big, and we keep going to the well, when we know that there's actually this much, eventually, we use the example of the ACL and the number of athletes that train on an ACL with a plant and pivot sport, right? Where the foot gets planted in the ground and their body goes another way. Not a large percentage of athletes are training the ACL to do that. And then the first time it happens is under load and gone. Now I'm out a year, to try to return to where I got to. And so we start to look at mechanical, arthrokinematics of joints and proprioceptive function of the joint capsule. And there's a lot of science behind that side too. So where it is very heavy and dense in terms of the scientific definitions of this, our sessions are geared towards being extremely active and engaged. And you move your shoulder the way you move your shoulder. Matt moves his the way that he moves his. And you own it and you learn about yourself. And I think, again, this is where it all happens. I had this amazing conversation this morning with a sports chiropractor, and he was saying, like, do you know what the issue is at the highest levels of sport? And I said, I've been in those highest levels of sport, and I think I do now. I didn't while I was in it. He says that the athlete doesn't know who they are or what they need, and so we treat as practitioners symptoms and what we think is right. But that athlete doesn't have necessarily always the internal information to help in that process either. And so then we're we're tapping into those externals instead of those internals. So we don't have all the answers. We don't claim to have all the answers. What we do know is this will change the lives of every human who engages with it.
Mm-hmm. One of the common things, I guess, among all of my running friends is that running helps their mental health. So those who are really struggling and those who are just lead a stressful life, a really tough job, or all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Running helps their mental stability, let's say. One of the things that Matt said at the start, and this was early on in your career, you said sport was not the soother. And the movement is a little bit different than the sport, right? I mean, you're going to define the sport certainly different than a casual 5K runner. Do you separate that from the physical movement and the benefits of physical movement? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Rookie's mistake.
Still learning about this here. I think that's a great question. Not asked quite often, but a wonderful question, because I think it can be a soother. I think the answer is what the expectation of sport is. I think what it is what the intention is, and is the intention disconnected from what is happening in reality? And I think, as you mentioned, it and James touched on this, movement, it releases endorphins, movement releases norepinephrine, epinephrine, all of the great things that, kind of jack our body up. But ultimately what happens is it decreases cortisol and that inhibitory pattern that I mentioned, right? And that is the hormone, the sole hormone responsible for stress. So it inhibits our body's ability to recover as well. So I think how we perceive, and this is the physiology of the mind, where how we perceive the goals we set in sport, how we perceive the sport itself is actually directly correlated to what hormones are being released. How you perceive that run, how you perceive that time trial, how you perceive that match is directly correlated to what is going to inhibit or enhance your performance. And I think for myself, why it wasn't the soother is because I was putting the bar on my shoulders. I was setting an expectation only to find, only to be content if I reached it. So the time leading up, it's like riding a bike and only looking, or running and only looking at the finish line. Well, the mindful approach would tell you to watch each step, to watch each foot, enjoy the foot in contact with the ground, enjoy and set smaller goals, or set manageable goals, ones that you can ultimately control in the day-to-day. That can elicit those feel-good hormones. That can make something like running, that can make it an absolutely beautiful soother. But what we must do is identify, right? I think in a lot of times, and I think this is where mindful approach to goal setting, which is another one of the topics that we discuss, is a lot of the times we set goals without an approach to how the physiological response will be, right? So when I set a goal, it actually pulls me out of the present moment. Well, when I've pulled out of the present moment, now I have my eyes on that finish line, I'm actually losing, not whether it be performance, I'm actually not better able to perform because I've set a higher goal. What I'm best able to do is set a goal that keeps me in that flow state. And I think, Clay, you probably would be one of the better athletes to touch on this with flow state. And it is very common in runners, is they achieve a flow state where they are present with every step. They are, receiving positive feedback from the environment, and that further generates flow state. So in my research and in my studies, one of the highest contingency of flow experiences is in running, right? And it's a sport where you are essentially dependent on yourself. So there are less variables to indicate, or less variables other than your intrinsic indicators to determine your flow, or to propel you further into flow. So I think it's ultimately our perspective on that, right? So I mentioned we set a bar, and we can only find contentment when we reach the finish line, or we get the final whistle and we've won the match, or we've won the national championship. But I would have very much liked to be present, and I very much believe that if I am present, and I've experienced this in my professional career, thankfully, is enjoying every roll of the ball, enjoying every pass, every defensive action, every header, every mistake. And I think that enjoyment and smelling the roses, as one of James's guests on his podcast mentioned, is integral to our life. The more we can smell the roses, and I would argue will propel you forward in your performance, because of the release of these hormones from the adrenal cortex, or from any part of the endocrine system. And I think that is a scientific way to look at it, but ultimately it serves a purpose, and it also feels good in the moment. So I think ultimately, when we can take a beginner's mind, and this starts with the calming of the pond and calming the mind, when we take that beginner's mind, we begin to explore human potential, right? And we realize that we actually have a lot more in the tank than we think. So I think that's a wonderful one. I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on flow and that sort of optimal performance space.
You brought up something that the flow in running. I hadn't really thought about it in that context, or that from that frame of reference. But it makes absolute sense. I've had a lot of really good runs. I've had some really terrible runs where the first 200 meters out the door, and something's aching, something's bothering me. I can't quite tell what it is, but it's just, there's somehow misery there. And that thing lasts for the whole run. If I start out the run I don't have that, whatever the thing is, and on those terrible runs, I don't think I've identified a thing, but there are definitely times, most of the time, I think that when you're running, it's not like cycling where you can do a little bit of coasting, right? You're fully engaged all the time that you're running. You're fully physically engaged, and I think there have certainly been times where I felt I didn't want it to end. Everything's going great. I feel great. Oh, there's a little nagging pain there. I'm sure that's going to go away. Wait 10 minutes, right?
This is Clay. This is very much what we do, right? This is that attentional focus. So in training, I think in training the mind, not to interrupt, but it brings up a valid point that when we practice this attentional focus, when we become non-reactive or we become non-striving with what we're doing, we very much experience in whatever posture it is in yoga, whether it be mindful breathing, whether it be a cross-legged position in our shavasana or lying, we all experience those things. And I think what this does is it sets a reset button. I think it's a reset button. So, you know, as an athlete and having a bad game, it allows us to not sort of snowball that. And it kind of stops the snowball at the top of the hill rather than allowing it to sort of pick up speed and momentum. And I think that's where this program, I think that's where mindfulness, and I think that's where being aware of your own responses, whether that be starts off with a shin kind of pain or a foot pain or an Achilles pain, and then it becomes, I'm no good at this. I don't even know why I'm doing this. I should just quit now. All of those things. And then when, you know, that is perhaps thought enough, it becomes a belief. And then we start to experience a lack of confidence. And then it becomes very cyclical in the negative way. So when we experience that negative feedback loop, maybe this is our stop sign. Maybe this is our reset button. We all have computers. Turn it off, turn it back on. The typical IT thing when you call the IT guy, hey, did you try unplugging it and plugging it back in? Well, this is that thing where we hit the reset button and maybe we can start a positive feedback loop. So a wonderful share. I sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that because I think it's a wonderful point, and it simply starts with awareness.
Yeah, I've got a really good mindfulness story. So, and this was in 2015. I ran a 750 kilometer thing. So I ran about 95 kilometers a day for a week. If you ever wake up one morning and you think to yourself, gee, I want to run 700 kilometers, call me, please. I'll talk you out of it.
I think that's one thing I'll never wake up and think on.
Clay, I did about 9 kilometers the other day, and I was grateful to get home. I'll tell you that.
I had by day 5, I had a wicked anterior tibia tendonitis. I was wearing a calf compression sleeves, and the little cuff at the bottom was causing some pressure on that tendon, and it was gradual. And I was running on the left-hand shoulder of the road, so it was a little bit more stress on my lower leg. So day 5, I could barely put weight on it. My 2-hour sleep break turned into about 12 hours. I didn't have a plan B. My plan A was to get to Ottawa at 4:30 on Saturday afternoon, and 12 hours was not recoverable in that time, and the time I had remaining. So I was destroyed. I definitely got some help, and I got walking again, and eventually running. But I was in a really bad place because this whole project that I planned for a year. I felt in my mind that it was gone. I just ruined it all by hanging around for 10 hours to get some help. So anyway, I was stewing in that and self-whining and all of this stuff. A friend of mine called, I think maybe prompted by another friend, but a lady who I have a lot of respect for. She had run a few multi-day races in the past, had done really well in them. She was one of my advisors, I guess, for as I was training for this thing. She called me and she asked how I was doing and said, not very good. I've got 385 kilometers to go. I've only got 4 days. I can barely walk on this stupid leg. I'm in a really bad place. And she said, well, I'll tell you what works for me in the middle of a really tough thing is just think about where you are right now. Who are you running with? Oh, I'm running with Steve Hunter. He's right beside me. I'll just look over at Steve and think about how he looks. And is he in front of you? Is he behind you, beside you? Look down at your feet. Take note of what shoes or what color your shoes are. Look around you, what's in the trees, what's on the road, and just enjoy just this moment where you are right now, how you feel right now. Forget all the other stuff. Just think about what's going on right now in this moment. And then the next moment will come along. You'll be a little further down the road. Think about what's going on in that moment. Keep running, keep moving, enjoy the moment. and those moments will eventually blend together, and you'll get to your finish line. And I've got I'm very left brain logic. And I think if I wasn't in that position and someone said, well, just live in the moment, I would have said, yeah, right. Yeah, whatever that means, live in the moment. But I took it seriously, and just stayed. I kept running, stayed mentally just where I was. I forgot, I'd left all of the other planning, the media, and all of the aid station stuff to my crew. I had a really great support crew, and gave up all the rest of the goal and stuff, and really enjoyed the rest of my run. It was amazing. And years later, I've learned that's mindfulness, and the power of that was amazing.
Yeah, but it's a great share. I posted this thing. Matt and I do a lot of similar reading as well, outside of his understanding of soccer and all those other things, and mine in terms of the therapeutic world. And this quote that I posted the other day, this is a beautiful example of it, is the after is the before for the next during. Right. And so it's a beautiful thing. Like when we take this moment and like we keep striving for that next moment, but then we get to that next moment and we forgot what that last moment was because we were thinking about that next moment, all of these things. It's beautiful. What a great share, what a great story. And that 95 kilometers a day, like I'm hard pressed to even want to do that in a car. So, I mean, good for you. We'll cheer you on from the sidelines of the next one. All right.
Yeah, so we're doing the same run again this year, but I've got relay runners that are doing it in 10K segments, and I'll be driving their cars. So.
Yeah, beautiful. And as we talked about, both Matt and I mentioned it to him after you came on the podcast the other way. Like we'd love to be a part of that and sort of cross paths and support you in that in whatever way we can, getting it out to our channels and through our channels, or being on course or something like that. Like I just think it's such a brilliant thing, and like you said, sharing your story through your own way and taking your, well, it is a gift. You think it's a gift. It definitely is, your ability to run that distance, but share that and do something bigger than run for the belt buckle, than run for the medal. It's going outside of ourselves and developing, again, that shared human experience, I think is now in my life, and I won't put words in Matt's mouth, but I think you could probably hear them anyway, that's the greater purpose. That's the end goal, right? There's nothing beyond that.
Yeah. A really personal question for Matt.
Yes.
I've talked to our other guests about when they first started to understand that their depression or anxiety was not okay, was some sort of disorder, and compared to when they got an official diagnosis. And I don't know if you have, but can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've actually never been officially diagnosed. I mean, I've spoken to people and they're like, yeah, that's anxiety. And actually my mom has been clinically diagnosed with anxiety, and we very much have these dialogues on a daily basis where we feel the exact same things. And that on a prolonged period, as far as I'm concerned, is depression, when we're feeling that hopelessness, or when we're feeling it hard to be grateful for things. And full disclosure, I'm absolutely grateful and lucky for all of the support, and I understand that my support system, I have a fiance that is my biggest fan, and my mom, who is even bigger of a fan, and they support me, and long before I was a professional, did they respect my profession, and did they allow me to be a human, even if I wasn't ready to do so. So my anxiety, I think, really spiraled, and really the first thought that I had when I confronted that and really was able to label it, and I think, as we talked about, once we can put a name to the face, it starts to lose power and lose control over us. But it takes a lot to come to that place, and I think that's where awareness and where mindfulness has helped me so much. Was it gave me that compass, it gave me direction to grow, and once I stumbled on mindfulness, I realized that I have anxiety. I realized that I have been depressed in the past, and what happened prior to that was something that became very cyclical and very toxic. Is, oh no, as much as I'm feeling this way, this is not me. I am the athlete. I am the pro athlete. I am this, I am that. I'm labels that, no, I can't, I have to be strong, as you mentioned, right? I cannot be weak. And also, you know, the nature of my position, diving further into that singular identity. I'm a defender. I'm supposed to be like a gladiator. I'm supposed to be the pillar, the spine of the team. As James is familiar, I was the captain at York University for, you know, the final 2-3 years of my tenure there, or at least a leader for a majority of the time. And what I found was that was a cape that I wanted to wear, and I wanted to wear it at all times, even when I was dialoguing with myself. And I think that it was a sort of rejection of the very thing that once we relinquish that rejection, once we relinquish that ego, we start to see ourselves in that objective way, and it starts to become a very powerful thing to accept. And once we've accepted it, it loses power, right? James and I talk about this all the time, where we have a monster in the closet. If we have, you know, we're scared of that monster, but when we open that door, more often than not, we befriend whatever's in there, right? And I think it's the unknown that scares us. And I think that unknown becomes known when we befriend it, when we open the door, when we face it. And I think that is the thing where, that is why I share my story. That is the discussion. That is the resonance. That is the human experience piece, where, you know, this is something, and I'll sports specify it, is in sports, this culture is very much superficial. It's very much toxic, where you are expected to be, you are expected to do. And if you are an athlete, you are expected to be a certain way and fit in a certain mold. Well, Matthew is not that player. Matthew is not that person. And Matthew is Matthew. And the best way to be the best athlete version of Matthew is to understand who Matthew is when you take away the jersey. And I think that is the best way to identify these things, is when we strip all the labels away. All of those things contribute to this anxiety, right? And it's all of a construct. It's all of the constructs we create in our mind. And yeah, I think that confrontation with it was ultimately that identification piece, where now I have a room, now I have pieces to grow. So I've kind of confronted this anxiety. I've identified it within myself, and I realized, okay, so now what? Where is the solution for this? Where's the solution? And the solution was, when I experience those things, I need to find a way to downregulate, and then take that one step further. How do I downregulate? What is the best way for me to downregulate? Well, I need to change my approach to sport. I need to find ways to downregulate. How do I actually do that? Is it a hot shower? Is it sitting with mindful breathing? Is it a visualization technique? The possibilities are endless. And I think whatever works for me isn't necessarily something that will work for all, but I think the idea is very much to find your way through. And the only way through is through, right? We can avoid it, and it really only gets stronger, and it only manifests itself. So I hope I answered your question, but ultimately, it became something where identifying it became the source of more anxiety, right? Because I was wearing this cape for so long.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned is that that everyone's different. The thing that's going to bring calm or control is different for each person. I've talked to a few, let's say, mature people who have struggled with depression and anxiety for most of their lives. They have been in those spirals. They have been in the incipient or just the edge, and recognize how they feel at that time, and recognize that that has led to bad places before. So understanding that they need to do something, they have found some tools. My sister, when she feels that way, she puts on her shoes and goes for a walk outside, gets some sunshine. That's the thing that that brings peace. And I think a lot of people over the years develop their own tools or their own escapes. I think maybe by the things that we're doing right here, right now, will help people to develop those before they have to get old and go into a whole bunch of spirals, right? Maybe that's the work that we're doing is helping to not force people to have to learn by themselves or learn from their own experience, share others' experience, listen to others' experience, and some of the things that have worked for them, right? I think we're running a little short on time. and I'll probably cut it off soon. Have you either one of you, sorry, got anything you wanted to add to what you've already talked about?
No, I think this has covered a lot of things, and we appreciate the opportunity to sort of talk about our platform. And it's not to say it's the only way, but we're happy to talk to anybody about it and with it, and through our means and our channels, connect with whoever, whenever. And again, like, just really appreciative of this, Clay, and of all the work that you're doing as an advocate in this space. And I think you said it, and it doesn't matter how many times you say it, but as a practitioner that's not a mental health practitioner, we all still have the ability to listen, to be there, and simply by sitting and listening and providing that space for somebody else, it goes a long way. And that would be the message. My take home, my takeaway is to continue to reflect in the self, because once you feel it within you, you recognize it in others. And I think that goes such a long way in my career as a practitioner, in my life as a partner, a friend, a colleague, a guest on a podcast, whatever it might be. Right. So again, really appreciate the opportunity, and hope to be a part of it with you moving forward.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say, I guess I've done a lot of talking, and the last thing I think that the why for us is exactly what you mentioned, Clay. And I think, when we can, there's a saying from, I wish I could remember who exactly said it. And I think that, the most important thing is, or the best type of meditation, or the best type of movement, or the best type of wellness that you can practice is the one you're actually going to do. And I think that is innate within each individual. And I think, whether that be going for a walk, or whether that be finding, having a meditation cushion and meditating for 90 minutes, or just 5, or incorporating that into your day, or a culmination of all of the things, I think what it is finding your way through wellness. And we do that through a calm mind. We do that through being present. And I think the take home that I would send with everybody is to be appreciative of the things, is to understand the cultures within, understand the autopilot within, and therefore we have a better chance of sort of changing that. And the more we do that, if we do that every single day, we change thoughts, we move them to beliefs, and then those beliefs become actions. So in order to make an actionable change, we must first think it. We must then, move from that pre-contemplative phase to contemplating it. We must think it all the time. It must become part of our core values and what we stand for as human beings. And then we're able to translate that into the physical world. If we're talking about benefit or positivity, if we foster that within, we're then better able to shine that light outwards. And I think if I do that, and if you do that, and if James does that, and if every individual takes care of home, then the community becomes larger. If the community is larger, then the township is larger, the city, the province, the country, and I think the world at some point. And I think that's where this becomes so powerful. And it starts with one, it starts within. And ultimately, this is what our purpose is, right? Whether it be in sport or in human life, our human condition is the same. We are all humans. We all take that breath. And ultimately what happens is this individual can shift into a place of compassion, because I have compassion for myself. I can therefore have compassion for you. And we move from, I think what we're seeing in our society is, I want to eat and you both are going to starve, where we move to that place where I want to eat and I know what that feels like to eat. And I'm going to, rather than, eat or be eaten type of mentality, maybe we can eat around the fire together, and life can be better for everybody, right? And that starts within, and we can build a better world one person at a time.
Yeah, that's awesome. What you guys are doing is really powerful, and I'm so grateful that you agreed to talk with me, and looking forward to seeing what goes on in the future. I mean, you guys have you got something going on. And I'll be following you and pushing you along, and yeah, let's see where this goes. This is exciting.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and with all that, what we're going to do is ask people to tune in next week on Instagram Live at Canal Pursuit. Thank you so much for watching People Talks.